Welcome to Atmospheric Tales, a podcast that amplifies stories and experiences related to air pollution and climate change from around the world. I'm your host Shazad Ghani, and welcome to another episode of the Atmospheric Tales podcast. On this podcast, we invite guests to discuss various themes connected to air pollution and climate change, such as science, policy, journalism, activism, and more. Please reach out to us if you would like to suggest episode topics, guests, or be an interviewer on one of our episodes. Our contact information can be found on our website, atmospherictales.com. Our interviewer for this episode is Grace Formentin. Grace is an environmental scientist working in the Perth Air Noise team at GHD in Perth, Australia. After completing honours research in air pollution meteorology, Grace started a graduate position at GHD in 2018. She now works on air dispersion modelling assessments for waste-to-energy plants, road projects, residential planning, mining, and other sectors. Grace contributes to technical assessments as well as qualitative assessments. She has undertaken indoor air quality monitoring for occupational hygiene reporting. Grace is an identical twin, and we hope that we have the right one on the show today. Our guest today is a professor in the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia. She is also the director of the International Laboratory for Air Quality and Health at QUT, which is a World Health Organization's collaborating center on air quality and health. She conducts fundamental and applied research in the interdisciplinary field of air quality and its impact on human health and the environment, with a specific focus on science of airborne particulate matter. She is an author of over 600 journal papers, book chapters, and conference papers. She has been acting as an advisor to the World Health Organization and is a past president of the International Society of Indoor Air Quality and Climate. I'm excited to welcome our guest today, Dr. Lydia Morawska. Welcome to the show, Lydia and Grace.
Lydia, I'm very excited to meet you today. Thank you for being here. You are one of the most highly cited scientists in the field of air pollution and public health. Your research over the decades has spanned themes such as environmental tobacco smoke, vehicular pollution, atmospheric particulate matter, and indoor air pollution. However, you started your career as a physicist, earning your PhD in 1982 for your work on radon and its progeny. Can you tell us a bit about your journey through these various themes and your motivations along the way?
Thanks for inviting me to discuss my career and all the scientific topics involved. My journey actually started much earlier than this. It's not just during the PhD, but I'd say it was when I was in the primary school around grade 5, maybe 6, when I developed specific interest in physics, and this was nuclear physics. I was interested in all science and not only scientific topics, but somehow nuclear physics was the area which attracted me, and I decided to be a nuclear physicist. This interest continued. I finished primary school, and then I was in high school. This interest continued. I was the best in my class in maths, in physics, and in other sciences. I remember then my family was a bit hesitant about this career choice. One of the reasons was they were saying, well, at that time in Poland, because that's where I was born and where I was in school, there was only one nuclear reactor. So they were saying, well, how are you going to build your career on one workplace in the country? At that stage, that international collaboration, as it is now, was probably not so extended, but somehow I didn't listen to this. I thought this is my interest, and I won't worry about this. What will be the job situation later? So that's what I did. I started my university degree, and I got my degree in nuclear physics. And from then on, I could continue on being a nuclear physicist, and by that stage I knew all the possibilities in terms of international collaboration, access to major facilities in Europe and in the world. But towards the end of my master was part of the master thesis was part of the degree. I got attracted to the area of environmental radioactivity. It was quite complex, obviously. Anything to do with the environment is quite complex, and the processes involved. So then I decided to do actually my master on the topic of environmental radioactivity. That was the last year of my undergraduate degree. That's how it was taken. And then the choice of the topic for PhD was radon and radon progeny in the air, in the atmosphere, which was continuation of the topic of environmental radioactivity. So this is how I transitioned from nuclear physics to environmental radioactivity. This topic was very interesting, but towards the end of my PhD, I started developing this thought that this area scientifically will be exhausted. After completion of my PhD, I got a postdoc position in Canada, first at the University of Hamilton, at the McMaster University in Hamilton, and then at the University of Toronto. And this is when I, on the one hand, fully realized that this thought about radon and radon progeny, while interesting, very important from the perspective of human health, I couldn't see much science more in this. But I was very lucky because there at the University of Toronto, I had an access to very good instrumentation, state-of-the-art instrumentation for measuring what's called now ultrafine particles in terms of size of starting from a few nanometers going to about 1 micrometer. The importance and the significance of working on this in the context of radon and radon progeny, which I was still doing, was that radon progeny attached to atmospheric particles. So for the first time, using this instrumentation, I was able to investigate the actual process of attachment. But with this instrumentation, I was also able to have a kind of a preview what's in the air. And then, for the first time, I realized that there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of particles in the air. I put the probe outside the window, a busy street in Toronto, and I said, what are these particles? Where do they come from? I searched the literature, I couldn't find anything at all. This kind of instrumentation was not available. Just only a few universities at the time had access to this. And then I realized that this is a completely new field of research, and that's where the scientific knowledge is. So this directed me towards the field of ultrafine particles in the air, atmospheric sciences, and atmospheric pollution. And when I got my position here at the Queensland University of Technology, which I'm still at the moment, that was the area which I decided to develop. So this was my journey to ultrafine particles and to atmospheric science.
That's really amazing, Lydia. I'm interested to find out that you knew at such a young age what you wanted to do with your life, and then hear about how it progressed into more of an atmospheric science role. That's very interesting. We'll move on now. While the global attention is on COVID-19 at the moment, there is another recent catastrophe here at home in Australia that we would like to discuss, as it is at the intersection of climate change and air pollution, and that's the Australian bushfires. These fires have burnt millions of acres of land, taken human lives, destroyed buildings, killed an estimated billion animals, and have resulted in some of the worst air quality experience in Australia and even New Zealand, which is thousands of kilometres away. Can you tell the listeners about these bushfires and how they affect both indoor and outdoor air quality?
Well, this is a very good question, Grace. Of course, I can tell about these bushfires, but I have no doubts that our listeners from around the world have actually seen on the screen how Australia looked like at the time of the bushfires. Prolonged periods of time, we are talking about weeks and months of bushfires, was something which really, I guess, changed the view of the world of what bushfires are, but also of what climate change is. Bushfires as such, fire is a combustion. This is something which we've been studied, my team and I have been studied in the context of ultrafine particles of any combustion products. So we understand the characteristics of bushfires very well. The biggest question is always, when talking about any air pollution sources, what to do to stop the sources from operating. So when we are talking about, traffic emissions, so we can characterize traffic emissions, but the next question is what to do with this information about characterization, what to do to stop the source or to limit human exposure to the pollutants generated from the source. Here we are talking, with bushfires, we are talking about source, which as such is very difficult to control. Of course, there are all kinds of protective measures which are taken, back burning and so on, and all the cautions about fire. But at the end, this fire happen, and when the fire start, sometimes, like it was past last year, it is extremely difficult to stop them. It is not in the same class as stopping, say, traffic emissions or any anthropogenic sources. So this is in my mind when this was happening, the fires. In my mind was what to do about this, but on much bigger scale. And it is not the scale of that week and months when this is happening, but what to do to stop this happening. In Australia, as such, we can't completely stop fires, because fires are part of the system, and fires have been part of the continent burning forests. So this is not something new or something which is to be stopped as such. But the point is the scale of the fires. We can ask what is the reason for this scale. If you go back or if you read about the forecasts related to global climate change, forecasts for Australia, this is exactly what has been forecasted. We knew that this is coming, we knew that the country will get drier, and we knew that the probability of bushfires will be significantly increased. So this is what's happening. So you may now ask, okay, what to do to stop it? Of course, Australia as such cannot be the only country stopping it, but globally, we have to stop combustion emissions, we have to stop anthropogenic emissions, we have to transition to clean energy. It will take time before the climate will get back to normal, but this is something which we really need to do. So this is a long-term view, and part of our work here in my laboratory has been towards this focus of energy transition and how to change from the current industry's traffic fully dependent on fossil fuels to clean energies. We've been working, for example, with partners in the Pacific Island countries, trying to develop projects and ideas towards transition away from cooking on open fire and other elements of transition to clean energies. So this is very important focus of what we are doing and what I'm thinking. But on a short term, of course, it's a protection of people exposed to these fires, people who will be exposed to the fire or to the smoke from the fires. And here we are talking about the relationship between indoor and outdoor. How much of that smoke, bushfire smoke, from outdoors comes indoors? Indoors, why I'm stressing indoors, because indoors is where we spend most of our lives. 90% or so in developed countries, people spend indoors. This question was asked on numerous occasions during the fires. And I was saying, well, it depends what kind of house, dwelling, or building you are in. Buildings, houses in Australia, particularly traditional houses, like what we in Queensland we call them Queenslanders are very open, and therefore most of the pollution from outside comes inside, so the concentrations could be a bit lower inside, but not much lower. If on the other hand you are in a very tight building, modern buildings tend to be tight, or public buildings like shopping centers are usually very tight, then there's significantly less pollution from outside inside. So there are many aspects of this. One may say, okay, so close up the buildings, make them as tight as possible to prevent air pollution. If you do this with so-called naturally ventilated houses, like most our houses are in Australia, one of the problems is that you may create other problems, for example, moisture, when everything is too much enclosed. So there's the balance of what to do, how to prevent from exposure to air pollution or bushfire smoke when this is happening, but on the other hand, to be able to have houses which are not prone to moisture. And the same goes for mechanically ventilated buildings again. How to balance the energy consumption, the tightness related to this or necessary for this, and the prevention from inhalation of bushfire smoke penetrating from outside. So these are quite complex issues, and this is something which still needs to be better developed for protection of people during bushfire events which are going to be happening. So this is one of other programs which I have in mind that we should look more seriously at.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think you're right that the impact of bushfires, it's definitely different to anthropogenic sources of air pollution, as bushfires are obviously an inherent part of Australia. However, I think most listeners would agree that they're now occurring on a larger scale due to climate change. But on the short-term side of things, it's interesting to wonder what we can do about the air pollution that comes from the bushfires. I know I've experienced the bushfire smoke when you wake up in the morning and you can smell it in your house, but what can you really do about it? So that's a very interesting point you make. What are some of the near and long-term health effects of these air pollution episodes? Can you tell us how scientists like yourself estimate the health effects of air pollution and separate them from other factors like socioeconomic status, nutrition, and temperature, for example?
First aspect of this, what are the health effects? I would turn it around and I would say what are not the health effects. The more air pollution is studied and its impact on health, the more it becomes obvious that basically every part of our body, every organ and every system is affected by air pollution. One would think that the main organ or the main system is our lung respiratory system, because that's where the pollution comes, is inhaled. So this is the first organ, but as I said, it's basically every organ which is affected by air pollution. Having said this, separating the effects of air pollution from any other effects is very difficult. I'm just going to say some general aspects of this because I'm not an epidemiologist, and this is a area of epidemiology, how these things are done and separated. One of the difficulty here is that the impacts of air pollution are not immediate and cannot be linked in an obvious way to air pollution. Let's say if somebody develops lung cancer, so the question is, has this person developed lung cancer because the person was exposed some years ago? Lung cancer is usually a disease developing for a longer time, to air pollution in his or her use somewhere there, or is it because some other impact? If somebody has stroke today, is this stroke because today or in the last 2 days pollution was very high, or is this stroke because of many other aspects or many other factors? So this is very difficult. If somebody has a, let's say, infectious disease which manifests itself in a way which can be said, this is the disease. But it's not like this with air pollution. With air pollution, finding that causal relationship is very difficult. So that's why it's done by through epidemiological studies. Well, of course, the causal effects are studied in different ways. So we need to understand the mechanism. The area of epidemiology is very complex in that sense that all the factors which affect this particular health endpoint has to be taken into consideration. So, say we are talking about the impact of bushfire smoke, but if it's happening at the same time when the temperature is very high, temperature also has an impact on health, but also many other aspects. So studying this epidemiologically, the data of all related parameters need to be taken into account. And one difficulty of this is that many of such events cannot be predicted. So when we are talking about the impact epidemiology of bushfire smoke, so it is not usually that the researchers have the study design ready. The people they would include as subjects in the study ready. And when bushfire smoke starts, then the study starts. It's not like this. It's usually not predictable. Therefore, such studies are often done retrospectively. And retrospectively, it's not that easy to get all the relevant data. So for this reason, this is extremely difficult. In my field, a particular difficulty is linking ultrafine particles and health. You may have heard about other measure of air pollution in terms of particles in the air, PM2.5 and PM10. In most of the countries around the world, these parameters are set as national standards. Now, in each case, just to make it simple, this is mass concentration of particles smaller than 2.5 micrometers or smaller than 10. So you can imagine this. You've got say a filter. You run air through a filter. You collect what you collect. You then weigh, and this is mass. Of course, you needed to have something at the inlet to let only the particle of this size of you are interested. So this is that's how the epidemiology of airborne particulate matter has been established and led to understanding of the health effects and the health guidelines set up by the World Health Organization and national standards. But one of the important aspects is that the main pollution sources, anthropogenic sources, which are combustion sources, they all emit particles which are very small in the class of ultrafine particles. So we say smaller than about 100 nanometers. So you may say, okay, so what about it? What's the issue? If we collect mass of all particles below, say, 2.5 on a filter, we collect these particles as well. Yes, that's correct. But the problem is that they have so little mass that we don't even notice that they were collected. Yet they usually constitute the most of the toxins in the air, and being small, they can penetrate deep into our respiratory tract. Objects as small as this in the air, when we are talking about objects of nanometers is basically bigger than of the order of molecular size. So you can imagine how difficult it is, first of all, to study this, and then to be able to distinguish what is the role of the ultrafine particles on various health effects compared to the larger particles measured as PM2.5. I've been working with a number of colleagues around the world, epidemiologists, toxicologists, and we've been trying to disentangle the impacts and also from looking at retrospective data to build up a better understanding of what ultrafine particles do to human health compared with larger particles. But this is just one example and one area of epidemiology where in principle we know why these particles would have health effects. Toxicology of the particles, ability to get into the respiratory tract, but how difficult through epidemiology is it to find out and quantify this impact.
It's interesting to hear that every organ and system in our bodies is affected by air pollution, because generally when we think of air pollution, I personally generally think of lung capacity and things like asthma. Just for our listeners, can you explain what is meant by the term epidemiology?
It is linking the exposure to, in this case, I'm talking exposure to pollutant with the health effect. So the question is how many people are affected by a particular exposure.
Yeah, and I guess it would get very difficult to separate, one cause and effect from another, because like you said, often it's linked to a few things like fires as well as temperature.
That's the complexity.
So many of us spend most of our time in indoor environments, particularly at the moment. What sources of air pollution in our homes should we be worried about, and how can we reduce our exposure to indoor air pollution?
Well, this is a very, very big field, and it very much depends where you are and what you are doing. I mentioned a little while ago our work with the Pacific Island countries in relation to household air pollution. And there the problem is the open fire burning. And basically 90% of people in the Pacific Island countries who don't have access to electricity, that's how they cook every day, several times a day, which means women and young children, particularly young children before they reach school age, they are exposed to this pollution from this open fire burning all the time and being in very close proximity to fires. So this is this particular area of Pacific Island countries, but of course there are many other countries and parts of the world which don't have access to electricity and cook on fossil fuels and heat their houses on fossil fuels, and this relates to huge health implications. In houses in Australia, we normally don't do this. We don't cook on open fires. We don't use combustion sources apart from entertainment. And this is part of the issue which I point out often, that we've removed pollution in terms of open fire burnings, but we brought it back in terms of entertainment. Think of candles. How many times we're in an environment where there are candles all around for ambience? It is nice. I personally like this view of the candles, but this is simply air pollution. So any kind of combustion which we bring inside our houses is air pollution, and no matter how we like this, how nice it is air pollution we should avoid. The same goes for any other forms of entertainment, which is not that much indoors, any fires we burn for pleasure. It's nice, it's ambience, but it should be avoided. In terms of other possible sources of air pollution indoors, the outdoor is normally the main source, and most of the pollutants are coming from outdoors, particularly in cities. And in cities, we've got traffic, we've got other anthropogenic sources. And dependently on the type of houses, like we discussed before, concentration indoors could be as high as outdoors. But in terms of other specific sources, specific to indoors, there could be a whole range of the whole chemistry going on inside because of the chemicals we use for different purposes. Well, for cleaning, for disinfecting, for painting, just think of the arsenal of bottles you have at home of chemicals, which can be sources of air pollution. Other important sources, well, it depends, and it depends to what extent they are used. But basically, the less chemistry is used inside the better. The same goes for building products and materials. Some of them are low emitting, but there are products which are quite high emitting and emitting for a long time. I'm sure everybody has an experience of walking into a newly painted room or a house and this smell. After a while, we get used to this smell. Of course, after a while, the smell goes away. But this smell, it is smell of something new, something newly painted. But this means that we are inhaling pollution. So again, the less we inhale and the better products we use, which do not emit pollutants into the air, the less we are exposing our body to harmful products. So these are some of the indoor sources of pollution in kind of environments like in Australian houses.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Lydia, about the cleaning products. I mean, we're very lucky in Australia to enjoy relatively clean air. However, we then introduce this air pollution into our own homes with chemicals and cleaning products and painting and things like that. So airborne disease transmission is an important topic given its potential role in the rapid spread of COVID-19. However, there seems to be some disconnect on this issue between the aerosol science and the medical science community. You recently wrote an article with more than 30 leading scientists in the field titled, "How can airborne transmission of COVID-19 indoors be minimised?" What are the differences between droplets and aerosols in the context of disease transmission and the implications for COVID-19?
Well, I realize that this is a bit complex for people from outside the field, and often this question has been asked, what's the difference between aerosol and droplets? And I respond that there's no difference. This is just different terminology. Aerosols, which are particles in the air, they can be either solid or liquid. So solid could be, just think about the carbon particle emitted from combustion. It could be liquid, like when there's fog. So we have liquid droplets in the air, liquid aerosols. Or they could be a kind of mix, solid and liquid. So solid core covered with something liquid. So basically, aerosol is a more generic term. And then if this aerosol is liquid, then we call it a droplet. Because in relation to to the disease transfer, we are talking about aerosols from human expiration. These aerosols are liquid, so therefore we call them droplets. But in the scientific literature, and for example in our earlier papers, we usually refer to them as aerosol particles. So as I said, there's no difference. Aerosol and droplet is the same. Why there is a difference between the approach between aerosol scientists and medical view on disease transmission? It's a bit difficult to point out to the reasons, but from what I understand, it stems from some earlier studies in 1930s, 1940s, which came up with a dogma saying that if you are at arm's length from an infected person, you are safe because it is only this distance where droplets from human expiration could reach another person. So this dogma is very ingrained, as I understand, in medical training, and that's why the medical community considers that this is the distance of importance. These earlier studies, or some of these earlier studies, didn't consider what is the whole range and size range of droplets from human expiratory activities. But even then, it's been quite a long time where there has been a good understanding that it's not just these very big droplets which are emitted, but the whole spectrum. The big droplets, if sometimes you see in front of you somebody really excited, an excited friend or family member telling you something, and then you can see a droplet emitted. You will see this is huge then, and falls very close. But during every activity, even the most calm and quiet activity, which involves just breathing, we all emit droplets. The size of these droplets is usually smaller. After SARS-1, we got involved in the studies of infection transmission. For me personally, this was another journey, because until that stage, which was 2003, ILAC, the International Laboratory for Air Quality and Health, which I lead, was not involved in this kind of studies. We were much more focused on anthropogenic emissions of combustion and on ultrafine particles. But at the time of SARS-1 in Hong Kong, there was an outbreak in the Amoy Gardens, a large complex of apartment buildings, 20-something of them. And one person infected, visited his brother for one night, and this one then linked to over 300 people infected in different places, different buildings of this complex. So the questions were asked, how did it happen? Very quickly some papers came up suggesting that there were some very fast-running rats which carried the virus from one building to another, because otherwise these people didn't have anything to do with each other. They were not in any direct or indirect contact. Then there was a group of epidemiologists which was brought there by the WHO, and they were trying to get to the bottom of what happened there, and they couldn't find any links. And then the WHO was assembling a group of aerosol experts to see whether any clues could be found through from the aerosol angle. And I was one of those invited. I must say that I was dreading the idea of going to Hong Kong at the time of SARS. And luckily I didn't have to go, because by that stage the epidemic was over, and the WHO concluded that there was not enough evidence for us to study. But then I started looking into the literature available on this topic, on the topic of infection spread and the topic of the role of aerosols. And then I realized, to my absolute amazement, how very little information on this topic was available. That I found basically 3 studies over a span of 80 years or so, talking in quantitative way about aerosol from human expiration. So I then thought, well, this is really a fascinating area of studies and extremely important. So we applied then for a grant, ARC Discovery grant, which we got, and this enabled us to do studies, very detailed studies on aerosol from human expiration. So we built a tunnel, we put a person with a head in the tunnel, and then we studied the size distribution, concentrations, composition of these droplets, and as a function of different activities. So breathing, speaking, kind of singing, it was not quite singing, but close to singing, and coughing as well. So this allowed us to quantify this, showing that the size distribution spans from droplets smaller than 1 micron to well over 2 millimeters, the big ones, of course, not going very far, and therefore a potential for infection spread. We've then done some more studies with colleagues involved in caring for people with cystic fibrosis and with the bacterium Pseudomonas, detecting its presence in such droplets, distance they travel, the time they spend, they stay infectious. So this again pushed this area of science quite significantly. But we were never able to attract more funds for research on virus, on transmission of the virus. And this was the same as it happened after every epidemic, that once the epidemic is over, then it's very difficult to attract interest, granting body of the world to the issue of the epidemic and infection transmission until the next one comes. There's a whole history written about this, how that interest spikes at the time of an epidemic and how it dies down then. What's going to happen now? Of course, there's been lots of papers published very quickly, some of them not really contributing to new knowledge. Some pointed out to the questions still open as they were open 100 years ago. I'm just hoping that this experience for which we are still going and will be going for months to come will really attract the attention to this important field, and more knowledge will be generated. And this is not knowledge important at the time of an epidemic or in time of pandemic. We have epidemics every year. Every year we have seasonal flu. Every year we have colds and other epidemics, which of course are not as dramatic as COVID-19 is, but which relate to a lot of stress, a lot of illness, a lot of economic losses, and being able to protect people against this and understanding what are the ways of lessening the impacts of such common epidemics would be of great benefit to humanity. So I'm just hoping that this experience now will help us to generate more knowledge.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's definitely when it's on the forefront of people's minds, a lot more research will be put into it. So it'll be interesting to see all the new papers and research that come out in the months following. You mentioned the dogma about the 1 arm's distance. Did your subsequent research that you spoke of determine a different distance as opposed to the 1.5 metre that we've been told about recently?
So it's a dogma, almost close to 100 years old dogma, which is quite significant. Yes, we've shown our studies. First of all, our studies show that the size distribution, as I mentioned, of these droplets is from below 1 micrometer to much bigger. Now, droplets of this size of 1 micrometer, they can stay suspended in the air for prolonged periods of time. So gravity is not the main force taking them away, taking them out from the air. So they don't fall as such. They are subjected to air current, to air movement, and therefore they are just staying suspended. This is general science of this size of particles in the air, but we in fact did specific studies to demonstrate that they travel much longer distances than that 1 meter arm's length. The tunnel which I mentioned we built, initially it was just to show the size distribution, but then we extended it to demonstrate that these droplets can travel much longer. We were able to extend it to 4 meters because, well, as you can imagine, any tunnel or any setup like this has to be housed somewhere. And with the space being a premium at any university or any hospital, eventually it was moved to a hospital, we couldn't have it longer. But we were able to show that these droplets and large quantities of these droplets travel very happily the whole distance of the tunnel, which is 4 meters, which already provides evidence that it's not just arm's length 1 meter, but much longer. And of course, from what we can then see from theory, they can travel much longer than this, much longer than 4 meters. There was then the question: what happens to the content and biological content? As I mentioned before, we were not able to do studies on the viral content of such droplets, but on the bacterial content in the context of Pseudomonas bacteria, which is of particular significance to people with cystic fibrosis. So what we did, we did a kind of an extension, we can call it this, to this tunnel. It is, imagine a rotating cylinder, rotating drum, and we kept these droplets suspended inside this drum, which was rotating, so that centrifugal force kept them. And we showed that 45 minutes, that was the extent of the experiment, a large number of the Pseudomonas bacteria were still intact in this drum. So it is time and distance. As I said, we didn't do this on the viruses, but that's what's understood. If they are suspended in the air, stay suspended in the air, they can remain stable and infectious.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. I can't believe that it's, as long as it's not coming out of the air due to gravity. I mean, if someone was then to walk through it, well, that it doesn't matter. The distance, it's also a factor of time as well. So it's very, very interesting. Lydia, you advise national and international agencies on public health issues ranging from disease transmission, obviously, to acute and chronic health effects of various air pollutants. Can you tell us about your role in advising the World Health Organization, and also how can people with domain expertise contribute to good public policy?
I've been working with the World Health Organization for over 20 years on different initiatives, helping develop different guidelines and on different projects looking specifically of various aspects of air pollution. As I mentioned, there have been a number of different guideline documents to which I contributed and of development of which I participated. Now, when there is a work to develop guidelines, say, against on indoor air pollution and health, there are several guideline documents like this in which I participate. There is always a group of experts involved in this and invited by the WHO to cover all the disciplines necessary, the scientific medical disciplines necessary to understand the whole picture. This, as we've discussed, this is all very multidisciplinary. So starting from the understanding of the science of pollution, human exposure to this, but then we include toxicology, we include epidemiology, and we include many other aspects. So one person with their own expertise in whatever it is wouldn't be sufficient. So there's always a goal. So my contribution has always been from the angle of understanding science of air pollutants, and then linked to the exposure, human exposure to this. But as I said, there have been others who were taking this to toxicology, epidemiology, and so on. One of my biggest roles in terms of my collaboration with the WHO has been the one over the last few years being a co-chair of the guideline development group of air quality. The current WHO air quality guidelines were set up in 2005. I was involved in this document as well. However, 2005 is a long time ago. New science, new knowledge has been generated, and there was an understanding that this guideline document needs to be updated in a way almost a new generated, considering how big a body of evidence has been generated. So this process has been going now for over 3 years. As I said, I'm co-chair of this big activity. We are hoping that by next year the document would be finalized and the guidelines would be available. This is this activity, involvement with the WHO, involvement with this multidisciplinary groups conveyed by the WHO to set up guidelines or develop other understanding of other topics is perhaps the most fascinated activities in which I'm involved, since there are always top experts invited to participate in such activities. So whatever question is asked from whatever angle, there's always somebody in the room who can answer this question from this particular angle. So, as I said, it's been a very, very rewarding and very interesting activities. We've been talking about the WHO. This is an ultimate body providing guidelines relating environmental exposure, health, and air pollution. But at each level, there is a policy making. So there is national policy making, there is state policy making, and there is often much more local policy making. How to get involved? Well, first of all, it's important to have an understanding of our own discipline's contribution to this particular question or field. But then the next step is to have interest in this. Sometimes it happens that you are invited to join an activity if based on the scientific contribution publications and so on. You are a person who generated science. But in many other situations, you can put up your hand. And if, let's say, there are agencies, state or national agencies calling for contribution to policy documents or to comments on proposed policy documents. So participating in this and voicing your view from your area of expertise, this is one way of getting involved with policy making.
Yeah, that's a great point, to be able to contribute to such guidelines in more of a local setting, which is very exciting. I know I've read some of the guidelines that have been put forward for comment, and I'm a bit early in my career, I think, to contribute, but it's very exciting to read them and to see what comes out. So your research is both important and urgent, yet its translation into effective public policy is obviously not easy. How have you kept yourself motivated over your impressive career spanning more than 3 decades?
I'm not sure whether I need to get myself motivated. That the motivation is in me. I'd say it's fascinating. It's interesting. Science is interesting, and particularly this science, multidisciplinary science, at all the stages of progress of the science, something new comes up, some new doors open, and there's never end of this interest and amazement with science. So you can never get tired of this. You can never stop being motivated. I like very much working with, obviously, with my team, with other people, and particularly with young students, PhD students. I always have several PhD students, because watching them developing interest in the field of their studies, watching them progressing, watching them discovering lots of new things on the way, this is very rewarding. So this is one other motivation for me to work with these young people to help them progress with their careers. But another element when we are talking about the public policy or motivation about the translational aspect of science is that seeing that science can help actually people is a very important factor for me. I must say that since just giving the example of infection transmission, seeing developing understanding of the way infections can be transmitted in everyday life, in places where there's inadequate ventilation, and understanding what can be done about this to prevent this, and in a way implementing this in our settings on a scale are good. I can't stop not to voice my views on this. This is the right things to do. This is the thing to protect people. This is the way to help prevent illnesses. The same visiting and watching people, as I've mentioned before, in the Pacific Island countries, but not only, in many other places, cooking on open fire. And looking at these babies on mothers' backs, inhaling this dense smoke, and seeing how big impact this would have on these babies, on the life of the children and the adults, it is hard for me not trying to do something to prevent this, because we know that it can be prevented. It shouldn't be happening. In many situations, there is no awareness. People, these mothers or these communities, they don't know that there's health problem. In other situations, they know or suspect, but they are powerless to do anything about this. So trying to find ways to help them and to protect them, I will be always trying to do this.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear your passion for your field. It's great to hear that you assist the students when you meet them, and hopefully you'll pass on your passion to them as well. It's been really amazing to speak to you, Lydia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Grace. Thank you for inviting me to this talk.
With that, I would like to thank our guest Dr. Lydia Morawska and our interviewer Grace Formentin for joining us on this episode of Atmospheric Tales. In addition to our production team and our interviewer, the questions for this episode were contributed by Deya Solanki, Ilyani Izani, Meenakshi Kushwaha, Doug Collins, and Kanan Patel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook to ask questions to our upcoming guests. Thanks to all our listeners for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe and share.